Hello, everybody. This is Take Five with Steven Travers, part of 100 Yards of Football. And my partner, Harper LeBel, is going to be joining us in about half an hour. But in the meantime, I would like to introduce my good friend and former associate with StreetZebra magazine, the great George Cuddy. George is the author of a book called Away from the Numbers. We're going to talk about that book, which was a seminal book about growing up in Los Angeles in the 1970s and 1980s, in kind of a semi-celebrity environment, or with the children of celebrities, perhaps was the best way to describe it. And then George went into the Marine Corps. Then he went to UCLA, was there during a golden era of their sports teams. And then he joined me with StreetZebra magazine, which was a great magazine in Marina del Rey. That was the late 1990s. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what he's been doing lately. So in the meantime, George Cuddy, welcome to Take Five with Steven Travers.
Thank you, Steven. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope I can live up to that limited introduction.
Well, I can make it more limited or less limited, but either way, you're with us now, and you're with us from Italy, you say?
That's correct. I'm in a monastery in kind of the north central region of Italy in the Emilia-Romagna district, which is about, well, it's next to Tuscany, to the east of Tuscany, and about 50 miles or so from Florence, northwest. And I've been here for 9 months, and I'm staying in a Dominican monastery where there are 6 nuns, all of whom are at least 70 years old, and probably the tallest one is 5'5", but they're sweethearts. And this monastery is almost 300 years old. It hosts Catholic tour groups and volleyball camps and cyclists and all sorts of conventions. So it's really it's a limitless space that I've yet to discover more than probably 15%. And as you know, I like to explore. But I'm very fortunate. I randomly found it. I was looking for a place to stay for 2 weeks, kind of on my itinerant journey through Europe, and someplace I could hike and enjoy the spectacle of olive trees and Sangiovese vineyards. And that was March. I mean, if you had me, as you know, knew me when I was younger, if you had a bingo card that had me staying in an Italian monastery at this age for an extended period of time, you probably wouldn't have thought you had a very good chance of winning that particular round of bingo. But yes, I'm very lucky, and I feel very blessed in many ways. Behind me is an art installation honoring a major flood in Faenza, which is a neighboring village, 2 or 3 years ago. So I really set this whole stage up for you here so you can see a little bit more of the installation, and trying to be as artistic as possible, just in your honor. I see the SC banner in the background, so I'm trying to live up to that competition.
Yeah, well, I'm finally getting my house furnished. I finally got my my dining table and my dinette set. So I think
people still say dinette set.
Well, yeah, I mean it's a piece of furniture that I think was probably built around 1900. Rutherford B. Hayes was the president of the United States when this house was built. The house that I'm sitting in right now in Vermont. It's an old place, but I love it, and I'm a block from my daughter. And you know, Logan was asking about Thanksgiving, and my daughter is a professional culinary chef, so you can imagine the dinners are just outstanding. But incredibly, George, and this is a very small town. This is southern Vermont, western Vermont. We border New York. In fact, sometimes you'll be driving to another town. You'll be in New York for 2 minutes, and then you're not. In fact, there's even people who take some roads, depending upon if they're like hunters or something, because New York has different gun laws than Vermont. And so if you can be like breaking the law for a couple minutes because you've got certain guns in your car that maybe Vermont doesn't allow, but I'm sorry, New York does not allow, but Vermont does. So those are some of the quirks of my living situation.
And we should all feel so fortunate that New York's stringent gun laws are making such a deterrent to crime. It's really fantastic.
Yes. Well, I'm going to steer clear of that one for now.
One of the things I pray about in the monastery daily. So.
Yes, thank you very much. I have other things more personal regarding my, shall we say, my shortcomings before God. Those are the main things I'm praying about. But mainly, let's get started here with your book. This is a book that I read, and it's very good. And it's very, very personal. And gosh darn, it's called Away from the Numbers. And it had me on the verge of tears because it described your youth, and it described a very, very, at times, lonely kid, at times a kid who wasn't treated very well by the people who should treat him better. And yet at the same time, you were also in and around privilege. And so this is the book, Away from the Numbers. So let's get started chronologically, and you could talk about using the book as your reference point, but talk about growing up in the valley, in the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles, going to this prestigious school in Sherman Oaks, and the essential facts that we find in Away from the Numbers.
Now, so to begin, it's difficult to have some sort of emotional detachment or objective skills to discern an evaluation of the book, right, as opposed to my personal experiences living the book. But I will tell you this, Steven, I told all of these stories that are in the book, all the tragedies and traumas of family, adverse situations growing up. I told all of them throughout my lifetime to different friends, piecemeal. I would tell this person one thing. I didn't lie. I would tell a traumatic story, but I never tied it together, as you said, chronologically. Right. And when I started to do an outline and take notes and look back through family photos and have memory triggers, I realized that all of these traumas happened in a 5-year period between 3rd and 7th grade. Okay. Mm-hmm. And to have that so condensed in a 5-year period of only 13 years of your life, basically, to that point, right? If we do the math, almost half of my life was as a child, was a constant sea of this tidal wave of powerful negative forces. Okay. Now, fast forward to my 20s and 30s and 40s, and I take full responsibility for every mistake I've ever made. I promise you, but I've hurt myself or others, which has happened a lot. Some of those mistakes I've atoned for. Some I'm still in the process of working out and paying emotional debts and other. And some I'll never be able to repay because of deaths or passing of time or whatever. So, but I never realized the effect that all of these traumas that I kind of compartmentalized, right? Mm-hmm. Every single action I made, whether it was abusing alcohol and drugs, abusing myself, being, taking pride in being a sadist and a masochist at the same time. And I'm not talking about sexually, I'm talking about decision making, right? And so all of these things tied into my adulthood and my response to these childhood traumas that were never addressed, were never discussed, were never counseled about. And I look back on some of my behavior, and again, I take full responsibility. But I mean, frankly, I could have turned out a lot worse. But it's uncanny that all of this happened to this little boy and to my sister to some extent, although she's 4 years younger and didn't really, I wouldn't say she was affected as much adversely. But I was trying to figure out how we went from this ranch-style mansion on 3 or 4 acres in Hidden Hills to living in someone's guest house, right, in a matter of 2 years or 3 years. I never really understood how my father was racing cars at Le Mans and at Watkins Glen, and then was in federal prison a couple of years later. I never understood how I could go to a school from nursery through 7th grade and show up one day after my father was in the LA Times for pulling off the biggest jewelry, arrested for the largest jewelry heist in California history, and kids I've gone to school with for 7, 8 years wouldn't talk to me. And that's not their fault, right? It's their parents who are at the breakfast table, whatever. So all of this stuff, okay, that I never processed as a young man or young adult, certainly. And I never understood how I didn't have the ability to comprehend how it affected every aspect of my life. So that's what this book was. This book was a confession. Mm-hmm. It was an apology, but more than anything else, it was cathartic because I had to write it all out, my own sexual abuse that I suffered twice, which maybe 2 people know about in my life, right, before writing this. And it's uncanny. Like I'm stumbling on my words, I apologize, but it is emotional. And I'm stumbling now because it's hitting me. Yes. But the main takeaway, I guess, for you as a longtime friend and for others was, I wrote this for myself. This was my therapy. Yeah. This was me kind of giving a middle finger to my sociopathic, narcissistic parents, which I was turning into the sociopath and narcissist too, right? The abused becomes the abuser. So these are all things that now, as a 59-and-a-half-year-old man, it's ridiculous to say that, but I'm at peace with myself. Like I figured it out, and I wish I would have figured it out sooner, but here we are. So that's really the genesis of how this happened. I just started writing down all these stories and saying, wait, this happened in 3rd grade, then this happened the summer after 3rd grade, then this happened in 4th grade, and Steven, it's crazy. And I wonder, and this is why I've always kind of gravitated to other people's families and found friends who had big families and blended in with them and was fortunately accepted by many of my good friends' families, is that I was always looking for a family. I was always looking for role models to model behavior after, because I did not have that. I didn't know how to model behavior. Yeah. And I don't regret anything. I'm glad I'm here now. I'm glad we're alive still and speaking with one another. But it freaks me out that all of this happened. I'm dumbfounded at times. So that's to give you a long-winded answer. That's what started this process, is me figuring out in this 5-year period and going, wow, how am I not Ted Bundy? How am I not how am I got up in a tower and sure, I know those are macabre things to say, but it's true.
You're in a monastery, in an ascetic monastery instead. You got
in a valley of olive trees. See, a valley of olive trees and hiking trails and Sangiovese vineyards. Do I deserve this? Maybe. I don't know, but
I think you do. And I don't want to interrupt, but from reading it, I'll tell you, George, it had a visual in my mind as I read it. And I know your face, okay? I see your face there, and I knew what you looked like when I first met you. And I had a picture in my mind of what that person looks like at about age 10. A boy, a child. And I see sadness, I see confusion, and I see tears. And that's what really, really made me feel like, gosh, I think I wrote, in fact, I wrote a review of your book. I think I named it "God Bless George Cuddy," and I really meant that. Like, a kid does not deserve that. A kid deserves to be nurtured and loved, and and I think you got some of that, but you also got a lot of weird and unfortunate things that happened to you.
You know what's strange. We always. So and I've been saying this my whole life, regardless of what station I happen to be at the time. Like, and it's a good thing and a bad thing. It's to be a relativist and say, well, someone always has it worse, right? And someone does always have it worse. And I've been in plenty of situations where I've said, well, it could be worse. But the reality is my parents didn't beat me. I was not physically abused. I wouldn't even say that I was necessarily psychologically abused. It was the exposure to actions and decisions made by my parents. So that was the difference. It wasn't like I was berated nonstop.
Right.
It's just my answer was to withdraw. My answer was to get on my bicycle and ride 20 miles in the rain as a kid, or spend all day on my motorcycle, with a pack of kids. Luckily, that was, I had motorcycles and go-karts. I was afforded these amazing releases. So, and sports, of course, which has really been the connective tissue, throughout my whole life with my dearest friends and you and whoever else. And I include you as a dear friend, obviously, but I'm just saying that I had to, in those moments of glory, and I certainly peaked as an athlete young, and then in high school I was sickly and scrawny, and that was all part of the psychological issues. And I started peaking again at 18, 19, 20, and then, in the Marine Corps and all that, and I've been obviously amazing shape ever since, but it was rough in high school because I went from being so far ahead to being so far behind. And when I say I was sick and scrawny, like I had 3 TBIs, I had pneumonia almost every year of high school, I had chicken pox. I mean, I was a walking nightmare.
Yeah.
And I barely weighed 150 pounds, right? Scrawny and by the way, I also had a very smart mouth. And so,
no, really?
I know it's hard to believe, but I think a lot of things I did in the 20s and 30s and 40s, even of fighting in amateur boxing events or doing different martial arts training. And by the way, I'm no expert. I mean, I'm poor to terrible at best, but I did these things to overcompensate, right? Like bicycle rides across the country and marathons and whatever. Like, you don't know why you're doing it. But you're doing it to overcompensate for developmental years where you were stunted.
Yeah.
And that's addressing that and saying, okay, well, that makes sense. And if you look at long distance runners like I used to be before I blew up my knee, or soccer players or cyclists or whatever, or baseball players, there's something driving us beyond just, and you played at a much higher level, obviously, with baseball than I ever did in any sport, but there's something driving you to do that, to achieve. And if it's the purity of the love for the sport, like you experienced, and I know way too much about, national champion Redwood High School, by the way, from the 70s. I know way too much about that, thanks to you. But congratulations again. But
so do many of the people.
If you don't have a purity of purpose and a true passion for the sport, sometimes it comes from a negative spot, and that's what it kind of was for me for a long time, until I don't know. I don't think you ever get to a point where it stops, but I had an intellectual curiosity and maturity, but I was way behind in terms of emotional maturity. Yeah. And maybe I've caught up now. I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever catch up entirely, but writing this book certainly helped exercise so many of those demons, right? That were never counseled us.
There's no question. And of course, you did become a writer. And of course, I became a writer, and I wrote an autobiography, I think about 15 years ago, and it was very cathartic. It was all about my youth and, growing up and becoming a writer in the StreetZebra years and publishing and professional ball and all this stuff. And it was very cathartic. But recently I have joined a Zoom group of basically it's kind of a combination of Christian Bible study and counseling.
Oh, coming in.
And it's one of the things that we do is exactly what you talked about, is do a timeline of our lives and describe different events in our lives, some good, some not good. And it really does bring back that connective tissue of these events, that something happened when you're 5, something happened when you're 9, something happened when you're 14, and you tie these things together. And you're able to look back on your youth, which is such an there's no question about it. Every psychologist, psychotherapist, every counselor will tell you you are a product of your youth. And now that can go different ways. And in your case, and I think in my case also, there were negatives in our youth, and we used those to build ourselves into stronger adults. I know I did, and it really looks to me like you have as well.
It took forever.
Well, it does take forever, and it's still happening. And and these are things that that will always be with us. And I think that's why we're both storytellers. You know what I mean? Because we like to write, we like to tell stories, and we have a colorful way of describing these events. Because let's face it, we've lived in interesting times. We both grew up in California at a time when athletics, it was the capital of sports, in no question about it. You're a Bruin, I'm a Trojan. Both schools were absolute dynasties during the times when we were there. But let's get back to the fact that you went to a place called the Buckley School in Sherman Oaks. And this is one of the really top drawer private prep schools in the United States of America. And you were there with the children of many famous people. And so why don't you give me a little bit anecdotes that you describe?
I'm going to do something, as you know, I'm going to do something I really despise and despise in others. Maybe I adore it in myself. So as you know, I'm a complete hypocrite. But I'm going to do a level of name dropping here that is probably going to turn off so many people that your viewership will drop decidedly. But in my elementary school, at one time, we had Melissa Gilbert from Little House on the Prairie, obviously. Nicolette Savalas, nee Sheridan, the actress. Bret Easton Ellis. Okay. Laura Dern, who was in my class for 6 years at Buckley. Jonathan Rogers, Jonathan Gilbert, Melissa Gilbert's younger brother, who was also in Little House on the Prairie. Don Galloway from Mission Impossible's daughter, Jennifer, was in my class.
Yeah.
Paul Thomas Anderson was in my sister's class. In fact, they were buddy-buddy growing up.
I did not know.
Yeah, so you had, and of course, the actress Amanda Foreman, who's the sister of Julie Foreman, who is the inspiration for Blair in Bret Easton Ellis' Less Than Zero. So this,
I don't want to interrupt.
One more. Front gate. Clea Newman is a year older than me. She was in The Great Above Me. That's Paul Newman's daughter. My good friend Mike Goulet, still to this day, we talked today actually. Mike's one of my best friends. His dad is Robert Goulet and mom is Carol Lawrence. Yeah. Clancy Collins, dad is Gary Collins and mom is Miss America Marianne Mobley. You can't even describe it. We were going to each other's houses and throwing water balloons at cars and having sleepover parties and going to go-kart tracks. And I never looked at Jennifer Galloway and said, wow, her dad's on Mission Impossible. Or Chris Kennedy's dad, George Kennedy, still one of the greatest days of my life when at the Buckley School Fair, George Kennedy, one of my favorite actors of all time, Eisner sanctioned, etc., said, "How are you, Mr. Cuddy?" As he walked by, I was like, "George Kennedy knows who I am." But I was never awestruck because all these kids were just in my class growing up at Buckley, and it sounds bizarre to say it, but I would say the most prolific person, well, maybe Melissa Gilbert, obviously, or Brady Sinellis, but there's a woman named Suzanne Goen, who is a world-class chef. Your daughter will probably know her name in Los Angeles. I mean, she's a James Beard Foundation Award winner, I think multiple times, she and her husband. But Suzanne and I still talk occasionally, via email. But to me, she is, of all those kids at Buckley in my era, Paul Thomas Anderson was my sister's age, 4 years younger. But I would say Suzanne Goen is the most accomplished of anyone, really, because of what she's done. But what's funny about her? She knew she wanted to be a chef when she was a kid. Like, she followed her dream and rose to the top of the profession. Unlike, there was no nepotism involved, right? She went to France to study. She traveled over the world studying different cuisines. And so she was a self-made success from Buckley in a world where, frankly, a lot of people had an easy in. And I'm not saying Laura Dern did, because her dad is Bruce Dern and her mom is Diane Ladd. And sadly, Miss Ladd passed away recently, but great lady. And you may remember I mentioned Diane Ladd a lot in the book. Diane Ladd, for a Hollywood star and Academy Award nominee, and obviously Laura won an Academy Award a few years ago, earned an Academy Award. Diane Ladd, to a greater extent than most of the famous parents who I knew as a kid, really got me. Like, she would take me aside at birthday parties and put her arm around me. Like, she saw the hurt. She really was an empathetic, wonderful person. So that's the one plug I can get in. So obviously I've name dropped a lot, I'm sorry, but that was you asked the question, and that was the environment.
Now, you mentioned Diane Ladd. I met Diane Ladd.
Really?
Yes, I knew Diane Ladd. So when you described her,
degrees of Steven Travers,
that was exactly how she seemed to me. Yeah. And it was, and I'll tell this, I'll shorten this story. It's crazy. This actually happens when I'm at StreetZebra. I'm at StreetZebra. I'm sitting at my cubicle, and you're probably 5 yards away from me. And I get a phone call from my agent, a guy named Lloyd Robinson, Suite A Management, Beverly Hills. He says, Diane Lane, no. Wait, it wasn't
are you talking about Diane Lane?
No, not Diane Lane. The girl, her last name was Ladd. She was in Charlie's Angels.
That's Cheryl Ladd.
Cheryl Ladd.
Do I have to do all the heavy work on the show?
Yes, he does. Cheryl Ladd wants to meet you. And holy cow, really? And he goes, she lives in Ojai. And she read your screenplay and might want to do something with it. And I'm thinking, this is my Bo Belinsky screenplay. And I'm thinking, all right, okay. I'm not sure why she's necessarily interested in it. There really isn't an awful lot for women other than kind of eye candy parts, but that's fine. Anyway, to make a long story short, I drive all the way out to Ojai. And I get there, and this woman is there, older woman, and it's not Cheryl Ladd. And it took me 15 minutes of kind of walking around in her office and looking at photos to realize it was Diane Ladd. So I did meet Diane Ladd, and
because I was about to ridicule you for getting the connection wrong. So I'm glad I held my tongue.
Well, see, I didn't, it wasn't me. It was my agent he said Cheryl Ladd. I'm almost positive he said Cheryl Ladd. And, Lloyd could have a slip of the tongue every so often.
If I can cut it real quick, Steve, the interesting part about this is that I've never heard this story before, obviously. So I'm fascinated that you and I both had wonderful interactions with Diana. But, we always talk about, you remember how people made you feel, right? Well, yes. I can remember how Diane Ladd made me feel as a kid. I mean, she really was genuinely aware that I was difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, I was having difficulties.
Did she talk to you at all about astrology? Like, I see something in the stars, because that was one of the things she said to me.
I wouldn't remember if she did.
Yeah. I even wrote a piece on Substack called, I think I called it, it was called Cheryl Ladd and Me, or maybe it was Diane Ladd and Me, was one of the two. It was this strange. But you mentioned the book and also movie Less Than Zero. So when I read Away from the Numbers, it reminded me of Less Than Zero by Bret Easton Ellis. I thought it was better. I thought it was more empathetic. That book, Ellis's book, and for people who don't know, it's about a whole bunch of rich kids in Beverly Hills in the 70s, 80s,
early 80s. It's the Buckley class of 81, is what that is.
Is it Buckley or is it Beverly Hills?
It's Buckley. It's set in Beverly. The book is about Buckley students. Everyone who went to Buckley knows who everyone in that book is.
Yes.
Just the movie version is, I mean, you can't say it's Buckley. You can't say it's Julie Foreman. He's got to, but that book is about Buckley, and everyone knows who everyone is in that book. I can assure you.
Okay. Well, that's maybe why I honed in on the fact that I had read that book, and the movie was not.
I don't mean to correct you on that. I don't mean to correct you on that tone. I'm sorry. Everyone knows who everyone is in that book, kind of.
Okay.
Everyone knows who Julian is. Everyone knows.
Maybe that's a little bit more of an inside info on your end than it is on mine. But okay, so I want to move on. And you talked about you were in high school and you self-described as a scrawny teenager.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You get out of high school, you go into the Marine Corps. Now,
I went to college first.
Did you go to
UCLA and join the Marine Corps?
Was it UCLA?
No, I went to UC Santa Cruz for 2 years.
Okay.
I actually played soccer and club baseball at Santa Cruz. I was a two-sport college athlete, Steve. I mean, how could you not know this? But it was very hokey. In those days, Santa Cruz was like 4,000, 5,000 students. Yeah. It was like a small liberal arts East Coast university nestled on the hills overlooking the Monterey Bay. It wasn't very conducive to going to class. But I did make the soccer team, and I played on the first club baseball team. And I can assure you, I was the worst player on the team. I mean, I'm terrible. I have good arm. I'm a terrible baseball player. But all my friends started this club team. Yeah. And we would play like Santa Clara JV and local community colleges. We'd drive to the games. We didn't even really have uniforms, but I mean, it was hokey. But
the bananas.
Yeah. But I dropped out of Santa Cruz and then I joined the Marine Corps then. So.
Well, what I was getting at was, were you looking to create a more physical George Cuddy from what you had been? Were you looking for the physical challenge or the mental challenge, or both?
So I started maturing physically second semester of senior year of high school. And then that summer the summer I graduated, I started working out a lot, and I was playing a lot of soccer and basketball and whatever. So I felt like I had to catch up, right? Mm-hmm. And I was still slender, but I had such a high metabolism and I had such anxiety all the time that I would just burn calories like nobody's business. Plus, when I say and here's the funny thing, I didn't realize at the time that I was sickly and scrawny, right? Okay. I knew I was smaller than everyone else. I knew I was slender. I didn't realize how sick I was all the time. I didn't realize that the psychological trauma I was experiencing, or that I was going through and continuing to go through, was having such an effect on my health, which it really was. And now, as an older man, I can look at it and say, well, gee, dummy. But no one told me. No one took me aside and said, hey, you might want to start, eating better and not partying as much, and working out a little bit more to kind of catch up. So anyway, as I matured a little bit, I figured it out. No, the Marine Corps was, joining the Marines was the direct result of the influence of my stepfather, who was a saint. So I had the benefit of having my real father being a psychopath, and then my stepfather being a saint. So I had two extreme, models from which to observe. My stepfather was, Annapolis class of 54. He was a naval officer. He came from a very established Louisiana family. The high school I went to in Louisiana, Jordan Street, which is Jordan, as your friend Frank Jordan, but it's pronounced Jordan. I mean, that was my step-grandmother's family. They owned the Louisiana Hayride. They had a clothing store. They had businesses. My stepfather had this thriving business in Shreveport, an alarm company business. So, but I can't say the word, but I was an F-up after I left Syracuse. I mean, I had a Jeep Wagoneer, I had a surfboard, I had soccer balls, I had skis in the back, and I don't know who I thought I was, frankly, but I was a monster and remained that way for several years. But my stepfather he took me aside, a year or so after I left Santa Cruz. He's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "You only got one shot at this. Like, what are you doing?"
Yeah.
He goes, "You're smart, you're funny, you're fit, you got all this going for you." And I'm just like, I don't. And I remember telling him that I wasn't prepared to go back to school. Like I was worried about going back to school and following the same path. And he goes, "Well, why don't you join the military?" And I go, the Navy, and they were living in La Jolla at the time. My mother and stepfather, she ruined his life. That's a whole other book. But he's like, "Well, if you want a challenge," he goes, "join the Marine Corps." He goes, he's like, "I knew a lot of Marines. Just join the Marine Corps. Knowing you're going to love it." And I did.
Yeah.
But I was a recruiter's dream. I walked in, I signed up, I was open contract. I'm like, give me whatever, I just wanted to prove to myself. And I remember at graduation, you'll like to, as a sportsman, you'll love this. The day I went into boot camp was the day that Mike Tyson knocked out Michael Spinks in 91 seconds. Yeah. And the day I graduated boot camp, September 16th, 1988, was the day that Tom Browning threw a perfect game.
So I remember that. I listened to that game on
my Marine Corps boot camp experience was bookended by the Tyson fight over Spinks and Tom Browning's perfect game. So, but that's the origin story for the Marines, and I wanted the toughest thing. I needed. Here's what I needed. I needed an overcorrection to my life. I needed an extreme correction to the path I was on. And boy, did I get it.
Boy, did you get it.
And to this day, my three buddies from one of my only duty station really, we're still buddies. We talk, we have a text group, we talk weekly. Same guys since the 80s.
I saw a photo of you and two or three guys hiking some months back. Are these the people we're talking about?
I may have posted a photo of them. Yeah, I'll have to find it.
Marine friends.
Look at this graphic. Wow.
Yeah. Tom Browning, he didn't throw particularly hard, but he had great control. I listened to that game. Scully was doing it. Yeah, it was. I can remember it like it was yesterday. 80. And the Reds and the Dodgers were in quite a pennant. That was against the Dodgers.
I never knew that. That shows you what a baseball guy I am.
Yeah, because there's no other reason I would have been listening to it, because it was a Dodger station. And if you remember in '88, obviously that's the Kirk Gibson year. Boy, you get out of the Marine Corps just in time for the World Series.
I can tell you where I was. I was in St. Louis, Missouri. I actually had to go to a special school at an Army base called Fort Leonard Wood. And game one of the World Series versus the A's, the Gibson game, obviously, I was in a pub in downtown St. Louis. And as you know, I'm not the biggest baseball guy. but everyone in the pub, the Cardinals fans, they hate the Dodgers, so everyone's rooting for the A's. And as much as I love Ricky Henderson back in the day,
Yeah.
I don't think Ricky was on the '88 A's, or he'd already gone to the Yankees, I believe.
He
right?
was in between he was with the Yankees. Yes.
Okay, right. That's what I thought. So anyway, so I'm like, well, I have to root for the Dodgers. Like I'm in the, I'm a contrarian by nature. So I'm in this pub, and the whole drawn out at bat with Eckersley and Gibson, and Gibson hits that ball, and I jump up and down, and the room is silent. It's probably the only time I ever rooted for the Dodgers in my entire life, but I'm just jumping up and down like I'm from LA, and they're just looking at me like, we're going to kill this guy, But the funny thing is, as you remember, as a baseball guy, like I told people I was with, because when Vin Scully's, Jack Buck would have been making the call because I think he was on the radio. No, Scully had the TV and Buck was on the radio, so it would have been Scully. And in a year of don't tell me. It's like, in the year of the improbable, the impossible, is that right? So, okay. But if you remember when the ball went out, you see all the cars outside the right field fence.
Right.
Lights, brake lights going red, because all those idiots who leave Dodger Stadium early just missed one of the 10 greatest moments in baseball history, basically. Yeah. And I was telling my friends, like, you see those cars? Like, that's typical Dodger fans. But anyway, I digress.
Yes. No.
You're not fired up, Steve. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. You should be fired up. And your I don't know whether we call it an ability or your a predilection for going the other way. Because you mentioned you're a contrarian, and I certainly knew you well enough at StreetZebra to verify that. But I see this in your personal journey, that you're going to go for the toughest thing you can do, the most outrageous opposite of what you've been doing, and this being, of course, the Marine Corps.
The name of the book, Away from the Numbers, is from the song by the Jam. That's what that message is, like going away from, even if it's temporarily detrimental. At least you're making a decision. At least this is my mantra. I don't know. It doesn't work for everyone. But at least you're making a decision to commit to something. Okay. And it might be a hard lesson learned, right? It might be very arduous. It might be a path that is debilitating. But sometimes you have to do that. And I just think for me, and it doesn't always work out, right? It's not always the best course of action. And I'm not saying I always go against the norm, but I just know if the crowd is fleeing and I was, as you know, the finish line of the marathon in 2013 in Boston, so I'm right there by the bombs. I just know that if everyone's running one direction, go perpendicular. Like,
yes,
I like my chances of going this way instead of going this way. And I don't know if this is some sort of psychological diversion or an escapism tactic. I can't explain it. Maybe you can better, but I just know that it's my nature, I guess.
Yeah.
I have our own nature. I don't know.
I see a lot of myself in you, maybe not as drastically, but I'll tell you who else you remind me of.
Not too much.
And I know you're going to know who this guy is. John Milius, who wrote Apocalypse Now.
John Milius is a historian. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. We've talked to him about him before, so I know you are very familiar with him, so I don't need to.
But for the audience, maybe.
He wrote Apocalypse Now, and he's a contrarian like you, and he's a writer, and he's a guy who says if everyone's going one way, I'm going to go another. In his particular case, it's the 1960s, and it's anti-war protests on the campus. He's on the campus at USC, and I'm going to go the other way, and I'm going to be a militarist, and I'm going to look at the world in a way that's not popular. And that's why he became such a successful writer, because he reached people who think differently. And that's what I think you do. And I try to do it myself.
Well, any time that I can be mentioned in the same breath as one of my heroes in Milius, I will certainly take that as a compliment and take it to my heart, because, you know, one of this, and not that I've modeled myself on him, how could I? I mean, but, and I don't say that in any sort of feigned humility. I mean, how could I measure up to a genius like that? But I will say that, you know, to understand Milius, you have to also realize that he, similarly to my situation growing up, had a lot of physical issues, a lot of health issues. And one of the reasons that he gravitated toward the beach and his seminal work with Big Wednesday was because he felt the need to expose himself to a challenge with these great surfers along the coast of Southern California, because he, and in many ways, this is, you know, drove me in certain sports or endeavors or whatever, and boxing and all that stuff that I'm not very good at, right? But I love it.
Mm-hmm.
He was never a great surfer, but he loved it.
Yeah.
And that passion, okay, which I has always been an inspiration to me, this guy. I mean, I'm so glad you brought him up. But that passion carries you through. And maybe it doesn't secure greatness in surfing or boxing or running or cycling or whatever, or weightlifting or martial arts. But it carries over to other aspects of your life, because if you have that drive and passion, and you love doing something for the sake, like you with baseball, or, you know, you with your writing and your screenplays, and I just think that if you don't have that fire to keep learning, to keep pushing yourself, to feel discomfort, to feel the cold of Vermont when you're out there shoveling snow when no one else is doing it, and when you've got to walk to the store and you've got to figure out your layering and what you're going to do and how you're going to fall when you step off the curb on the black ice. Like, those are the discomforts that define our character. And I always worry, and this is a lesson my stepfather taught me. I'm going to pass it on to you and your audience. He said, when you meet someone for the first time, or you get to know someone, try to imagine, if they are less fortunate than you, that you could have survived what they survived. And in the same breath, if someone is in a better station of life than you, wonder if they could have survived what you survived.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can apply that, and this is something I wish I would have learned when I was 21, or no, which I heard when I was 21 or 22, but didn't apply for decades later, right? Because I thought I knew it all. Clearly I did not. But if you can meet someone in any situation and sense that, your level of empathy and respect automatically goes up. And you look that person in the eye and you shake their hand firmly, and you put your hand on their shoulder when you speak to them. And that connection is really empowering for both people, right?
Yeah.
Because they're sensing that mutual respect. So I'm getting off on a tangent here. You got me all fired up with Milius. I'm sorry.
No, you are not getting off on a tangent. You're speaking truth, and I agree with you 100%. And you've already described several things in my life that are right there. But I want to get to UCLA, and there seem to be these parallels in your life and in my life and the way we've approached things. You go to UCLA after you've been in the Marine Corps.
I was actually in the Marine Corps at the time on active duty at UCLA.
But you're not like your average UCLA freshman,
correct,
fraternity kid. You are a man. The Marine Corps will make you a man. So you have that, and I consider it a huge advantage. And I think it makes you a better student. For me, I had already played professional baseball when I got to USC. The other commonality is you were talking about all these famous people you knew at Buckley School. And UCLA was probably like that too. I know USC was like that. There were just celebrities everywhere. There were children of celebrities, and there were alumni who were celebrities. So that was a commonality. But you get to UCLA, you've been in the Marine Corps, now you're a man, and you're not a scrawny kid anymore, and you're at this great school, and you come across a whole bunch of people that I later knew at StreetZebra. So give me the UCLA experience kind of with looking towards some of these people. You know who they are, and you can mention any of their names that you wish, that you met there, and how it formed your experience in Westwood.
So, I mean, this will obviously segue into our discussion about the demise of the UCLA football program, but I cannot be, obviously I'm not telling a personal story, I won't be, but you have to understand, I grew up skateboarding on UCLA's campus, right? I knew Ackerman Union when it was a dump, when there was a bowling alley on the basement floor, and all the t-shirts were in cardboard boxes, and you went through the boxes to buy your t-shirt, and you got a slice of pizza for $1 at the Union there. I had a friend, a very good friend at Buckley named Louis Kamer, who was one of my best friends growing up, and lost his house in the Palisades fire, unfortunately, like so many others. But his mother was a art professor or a lecturer in the art department for an extension course or whatever, and she'd go up there on Saturdays or Sundays occasionally and bring us and give us $5 each, and we would chase each other on skateboards all over the campus. So eventually in my 20s, when I got to UCLA and had grown up going to see Bill Walton play games, and I was his first game at the Rose Bowl in '82 when I was in high school at Loyola against Long Beach State. I mean, I snuck onto the field, Steve. I was on the UCLA bench basically when Todd Hart of Long Beach State broke his neck he was a defensive back, and Mike Sherrard was going out for a pass from Tom Ramsey, and Todd Hart fell and broke his neck, and the game was stopped and I was there as a scrawny 16-year-old next to Irv Eatman on the sideline, right? So I grew up knowing I would always go to UCLA, and I didn't go there out of high school because I wanted to get out of LA and get out of the situation because I'd moved back from that. It's a long, convoluted story, but you speak of this maturity and being a man, because the Marine Corps makes men, makes killers, but before men. But I'd earned the title of Marine, and I had done quite well in a short period of time in an ideal unit at Camp Pendleton, but I didn't consider myself a man. In fact, my confidence may have been lower than it was before I was in the Marine Corps. I had a fake courage and a fraudulent backbone. I thought because I'd earned the title, people would automatically assume that I had some sort of power, but some sort of elan, and I didn't. That's a great word, thank you. I'm not looking at thesaurus right now. I'm in this monastery, but I'm stuttering over my words. I apologize, but as you can tell, I'm speaking from the heart. I was not fully developed. I was in the process of being fully developed, but I wasn't what I was portraying myself to be.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately, I did have the pleasure and displeasure later, subsequent displeasure years later, of falling in with a group that has similar interests, and we're sports fans and sports fanatics, and enjoyed writing and enjoyed creativity. Other than that, and that was probably my one day in the field. That's a recruit company going up Mount. I can't say it, but there's a very famous.
I've been there. I've been to the shooting range there.
Well, that's where I worked. I worked at Edson Range. That was my.
I was when I was in the Army. That's where we did our testing. But go ahead.
Oh, that's why all those targets were messed up. But yeah. So I was fortunate to fall in with several people and become close friends with several people who we later worked with at the magazine, and I can talk about that magazine forever because I, frankly, was one of the reasons that happened. Okay, I don't know if you know the origin story, but the great John Simerson, the USC tennis player, who I speak to this day and love, my favorite person besides you from the StreetZebra years, and Rick Devereaux, of course, who I'm happy to talk about. But John Simerson had the website Sports Celebrity Network and Athlete Daily first. And then Zach Bemis, my friend at the time, had these investors, the Solomons, and obviously David Solomon is head of Goldman Sachs now, but David's younger brother Andy and his, I don't want to describe Jeff Solomon, that's another show. But I think, and to give Andy credit, I believe to this day that Andy Solomon's a good guy. And I believe that he's a decent person.
He meant well.
I think he meant well. I don't think he was equipped
He did not read the Times.
Correct.
He did not read.
And by the way, we would be Barstool Sports before Barstool Sports if we'd stuck with the original idea of driven by personalities. And that's the rub on for John Simerson is his idea was so prescient to create these personalities in the media who were attached to a certain sport, okay, have them experts in the field like we were with you in baseball and me with whatever, and every sport except for baseball, and have Chris Reed doing his thing and whatever. These great talented writers who could be personalities and interact with the true sports athletes on these professional and college teams to create this relationship. That's what the Barstool Sports model is that John Simerson came up with in 1998, okay?
Yes.
And the business plan for the Solomons, and I'm digressing again, I apologize, but
no, go ahead. I want to
portal for neighborhood sports. And by the way, as you know, I did all the research on that and went to every rec center in Los Angeles, and 10% of them even had computers. And these guys were thinking about this online registration for LA youth rec sports and all this. If we had just kept a simple sports website with media content that evolved as the technology was evolving for streaming and video, and kept the magazine as a promotion for the website, we would have an empire, as that Michigan kid Portnoy did. But anyway, so I never got a finder's fee for introducing Zach and the Solomons to Simerson. I don't want it because it kind of ruined Simerson's whole plan. John Simerson's a great guy, and he's one of my favorite people, and I'm tremendously loyal to him as a friend and as an employee at the time. And again,
I loved him.
I do not hold a grudge against Andy Solomon. I think Jeff Solomon was a complete moron, and I will. Unfortunately, at the time, we all had to defer to his lack of expertise, I guess.
I still don't know what he did.
Deferring to his lack of expertise, you can use that line if you like. But I think that the core group, okay, the original core group of writers who were in that narrow, I'm not sure if you ever saw that narrow passageway at the original building.
I did. I was
Korea, Taylor Whitley, Chris Reed, myself, Rick Devereaux, Tim Townsend, John Simerson. That group was very talented and got along and were like brothers and were experts in their particular sports, okay? And that all got kind of stripped away. And when I left, I mean, as you know, I left early because I saw the writing on the wall. I'll tell you a quick story you'll love. I'm not sure if I've ever told this in an interview, but when they dangled the stock options to us, this may have been before you got there. And that was a common thing in the early days of the internet, right? These companies wanted to retain talent. So like, well, we may or may not make it, but we'll give these guys the hope. Now, of course, they're diluting the percentages of stock and not diluting theirs, which is a common practice, but that's fine. And I think they gave us like 10,000 or 20,000 shares of stock options. And we had to sign this paperwork, and I'm just like, this is a joke. So I'm not sure I can do that on your show, but so that's signal. I was rolling dice. So Taylor Whitley, the nicest guy in the world, comes out, Pally High grad, and goes, "Oh my gosh, George, I'm set. Jennifer and I could buy a house now. We can go to the bank and show this." And I'm like, "Taylor," I go, that's toilet paper. I go, in the slim chance that this company makes it, I'm sorry, there's background noise in the monastery. In the slim chance this company makes it, okay, that is going to be so watered down that it's not going to be worth anything anyway. I mean, you're lucky if it's going to be worth $5,000. Don't. And he didn't get it, right? I said, this is a carrot they're dangling to keep us around. I left a couple months later, and because I knew it was happening. I knew it was coming. Their business model was not sustainable, especially after the research I did on the rec centers, going to every rec center in LA County, which was fun. And sorry, Steve, there's an event at the monastery.
Not that bad at all. Don't worry about it. Maybe you probably hear it more than I do.
I'm sorry. So everyone wants to be a part of this show. That's very popular. But anyway, back to UCLA, and I feel very fortunate, even though that company collapsed and failed miserably and blew through $10 million from the investment from Hicks Muse in Dallas, just because the business model they chose was such a departure from the brilliance of John Simerson's original idea, which is what Dave Portnoy did at Barstool and has been a masterpiece, as much as that guy's a kind of a tool. But Simerson came up with that first. And that's the path we could have been on as a cohesive team of people who love sports, people who are athletes, people who are journalists, all rolled into one. And I don't regret that we didn't become Barstool or whatever, but I regret that the leadership cadre was so adamant that their way was the right way.
Yeah.
And perhaps I should have stood up. And I remember when they chose StreetZebra, okay, which I still think Sports Celebrity Network or Athlete Daily was better. But when they chose StreetZebra, we had a meeting in this conference room, and they had the art, God knows how much they paid for the promotional art and all that. And I guess we voted, right? They took this hollow vote. And I went up to Andy Solomon afterwards. I said, let me ask you a question. If it had been 18 votes to 0 for whatever the other name was, Rhino or something, Flying Rhino, maybe, I don't remember. Maybe that was one of Zach's earlier ones. I can't remember. But, and usually my memory is so good. And I said, would you have gone with that, or would you have made the decision? He didn't answer me. I'll never forget that. I'm just like, what a tool. Like, this guy is, I'm using tool instead of all the other words I normally would use, since it's a family-friendly show, and you're such a good Christian. But he kind of looked at me like, yeah, I would have overridden the 18-0 vote. And I just remember going, oh, this is a goner. Like this, because that wasn't the environment we had with the core group. And I'm not saying it would have been successful, or we would all have been millionaires, or we would all have been famous, but remember, we had the Bob Golick radio show, which I produced. We had Chris Reed making inroads with all these teams, with the Kings, like being really respected in the hockey community. We had you with baseball. We had Devereaux with extreme sports. We had the connection with the schools.
We had experts. Everybody was an expert.
I think about it now, and I see these buffoons who have made millions in sports media. And it's not the dollars. I can remember when Jay Adonde, who's now the director of the journalism school at Northwestern, okay, the former LA Times writer, came up to me at a Lakers game and said, hey, George, how you doing? And I was like, Jay Adonde knows who I am? Like, I remember thinking, like, wow, we are making an impact. We have our pictures in the magazine next to our bylines, right? I'm really, this is the most I talked about StreetZebra for a long time. I don't know how I segued from UCLA. I'm sorry, but I just remember being blown away that Jay Adonde, a big-time writer with the LA Times, and again, now the director of the journalism school at Northwestern, his alma mater, knew who I was.
Yeah.
Like, how is that possible? But we were making an impact. Great guy, fantastic.
Yeah,
We were
I mean,
making,
I was friends with a number of people at the LA Times that I got to know and saw, because you'd see them on a regular basis, and it was an absolute blast. I mean, just from my standpoint, I was constantly at Dodger Stadium. The Staples Center was brand new. Used to go there with Taylor Whitney all the time. Down in Anaheim, always at the LA Coliseum, occasionally at the Rose Bowl, covering the Trojans, covering baseball, and doing a lot of high school stuff, which I loved. And I knew and covered and got to know a lot of people, Matt Leinart being one of them, who were high school kids at the time and later became superstars in college and pro football and other sports. And I mean, there was a period of time when I first got there, there were 9 people in that little cubicle on
Delray.
it was on Lincoln Avenue in Marina Del Rey.
No, it was on the street was called Delray. It was parallel to Lincoln Boulevard. Remember, it was one street over from Lincoln. It was that street that ran parallel to it.
We're talking about that little sort of like a former apartment complex.
Zach and I lived there for 6 months. And let me tell you a great story about that apartment, okay? You went to that apartment?
I actually worked there for a couple of months.
Okay, because Zach and I lived in that place when we were, eating 25-cent burritos to survive each day.
Yeah.
And doing restaurant reviews and not paying for the food and getting free meals. Like this was our scam to stay alive. In fact, I had a rusty mountain bike that someone gave me, okay? And I used to ride to the gym in Santa Monica, and I can't remember the name of it. It was they closed. It was great. They were selling memberships the day before they closed, basically. And I never locked it because it was just, who's going to steal this decrepit, rusty bike? Well, someone did. And I remember coming out of the gym and just thinking, well, if someone needs that bike, they deserve it. Like, I'm not even going to be mad. But Zach and I slept in one of the back rooms, this like massive storeroom. Yeah. And we had like futons or something set up on, with like a wall between us, complete privacy. And there was an alley behind there was a Harley Davidson dealership, a Buell dealership there. And there was an alley back there with dumpsters. And what I can only assume was a alcoholic, homeless bum couple was making love. The nomenclature is off there, but they were making beautiful love in the alley. And I remember we could hear them through on the second floor, and we could hear them. And I think Zach said something like, how much lower can we go? Like we're surviving on 25-cent burritos just because we want to be journalists and sports journalists, and we're living in this office, and there's a shower there, thank God, and these bums are making love in the alley.
It was doing. That may be true, but that place was only blocks away from high-end living, a high-end Marina Del Rey swingers complex.
We were living in an office with a shower,
hotels and restaurants, and in fact, the Boston Celtics stayed at the hotel that was only about a block away. One day, Simerson, I, Tim Townsend, and Devereaux were standing on the railing, and the coach of the Boston Celtics, help me out here, George. He was the former BYU star who was Danny Ainge. Danny Ainge was the coach of the Boston Celtics, and Simerson says, "Hey, Danny, how you doing?" And he goes, "Oh, doing all right." He goes, "Hey, we're a sports magazine." He talked him into coming up and doing an interview with us for about 5 minutes. He had a game that night at the Staples Center. But yeah, getting back to, I think there were 8 people, maybe 9. There was also a guy named Chris Scruggs, I believe.
Who?
Scruggs.
No, Newey Scruggs.
Newey Scruggs. He also was on the radio.
No, he was a sportscaster on Channel 5. He was a
Yeah.
primetime sportscaster.
Okay. And you know who else was with us?
I can't remember which channel. Sorry.
She wasn't really an employee, but she worked and was really a groundbreaker in terms of women in sports. Was Lisa Guerrero was part of that group.
No, she's a scam.
Well,
Lisa Guerrero, she's a complete scam.
Well, okay, but she was. I remember her being there.
She would email these terrible articles in that I would have to edit. She's almost incoherent and illiterate, and she only got by because of her body and her looks. She is a complete moron.
Well, that's kind of the point, George, is that's really probably politically incorrect to say this, but that's really where so many of these women are now in sports. So many jobs that are not going to men who really know sports, or for that matter, probably women who really know sports. They're going to girls who look really good in a mini skirt at a stadium. But that's a subject for a different day. There were 9 guys when I showed up, and I'll never forget it. We're all in this little cubicle area. You're there, Simerson, and and everyone's scouring the internet and how did you see this? And Simerson has said, check this out, and it's like, I don't know, some story about Britney Spears, and emailing it to each other back and forth, and just a lot of testosterone, young guys, people in their 20s and 30s, mostly from UCLA. Were those guys people who had written for the Daily Bruin, or was
no?
That really wasn't the story.
The only guy you might know the name, who's the beat writer for the Niners now with the Chronicle, Eric Branch.
Yeah.
Eric Branch is a friend of mine from UCLA. Now he's a legitimate sports writer. I mean, he's been in the Bay Area forever. He was in Santa Rosa for a while, but he's from the Bay Area. He's a big Niners and Giants fan. So he was a Daily Bruin sports writer of some renown. He did not work for StreetZebra. He was more, I would say, polished and professional, and has had a magnificent career in the Bay Area as a sports writer, as you did as well. But he's the San Francisco Chronicle beat writer for the Niners now. It's his dream job. He's achieved it. But he was the only guy I knew with the Bruin. None of those other guys at StreetZebra worked for the Daily Bruin. Zero.
Were they just friends of Zach? Did Zach or Simerson, or? Sort of the ringleader of this.
Simerson, again, I was the conduit from. There was a guy named Steve Kamen, who you don't know.
I know the name.
Steve Kamen was one of the original guys with StreetZebra, started with Athlete Daily and Sports Celebrity Network with Simerson. He was selling advertising. And Steve Kamen was friends with a friend of mine. And that friend of mine introduced me to Steve. And then Zach, at the time, was talking to Solomons. So I brought them together. No finder's fee. Thank you very much. But so Simerson and Steve Kamen and Townsend were working together, Chris Reed, etc. And then Zach came in with the Solomons, and that's how that was formed.
Andy?
I hope this doesn't change any of your view of history, but this is the actual truth of how.
No. I that's one of the reasons I brought you on, because I was not there at the very beginning.
Right.
I joined up in the spring of '99, and so you guys have been going. But I was not in the office every day at the beginning. I didn't come in as a regular employee for.
I remember.
Yeah, I would come in on occasion, or maybe use the computer. But I was sending in freelance pieces on a regular basis. So as early as March of '99, I was a regular StreetZebra writer. I didn't become an employee until a little bit later. But what did Andy Solomon do before he
was an executive at PepsiCo and Taco Bell in Orange County, and so he was a VP of some department there. And obviously his brother David, is CEO of Goldman Sachs and has been for a while. I took over for Lloyd Blankfein. But yeah, I clashed with Andy occasionally, but nice guy. I liked him. I liked him. His brother Jeff was a as I described earlier. He's not really worth our conversation because he didn't do anything there.
Yeah,
he did nothing.
I like Andy as well.
Yeah. They just chose Jeff. I mean, Jeff was a hindrance to progress, but Andy, just as many did at the time in the late 90s, early 2000s, they chose the wrong business model. It's as simple as that.
And they chose to become a website that focused on people signing up with rec centers to play volleyball or do some sort of.
Don't forget, they invested several $1 million in buying the Sport and Social Club brand out of Chicago, which then was shuttered within a year. So that was another
social clubs.
Yeah, they saw to the layoff of several hundred employees of a relatively stable company by purchasing it, mismanaging it, and then shuttering it. So this was, again, this was the improper model, and I can't blame them because this was their vision, right? And we all have visions that succeed and fail. Had they stuck to the John Simerson vision,
yeah,
you would have Barstool Sports. Barstool Sports would not exist. It would be what we had.
It'd be StreetZebra, and it'd probably be you because you're an iconoclast. You'd be perfect with a beer in your hand, sitting there on a bar stool, saying, you're just saying anything you want to say about.
I mean, Interview Magazine is calling me. Hold on. Vanity Fair is on the line to interview me next. I mean, this iconoclast. Oh, wow.
There was an event that happened, and this said everything you need to know about the dot bomb era. I wrote an article called.
And by the way, I'd like to talk about your dot bomb article if we can. If we have time for that.
Okay. Well, let me quickly run this article and run this story. It won't take too long, and then you can.
What's your show?
You can talk about dot bomb. What happened was, if we all remember, in those days, the way these .com companies made a splash was by spending a lot of money and usually inviting a whole bunch of people to some tropical paradise or some resort where everyone would have a great time and there'd be the cameras and they'd get publicity. So what we did after we get $10 million in some through raising it through Goldman Sachs. And
so the funds came from Hicks Muse in Dallas from that investment group.
Okay, you can add those particular facts. Andy decides he's going to fly everybody, but this time, this little company, which when I started was 9 people, is now maybe 3 different cities: Chicago, Los Angeles, and maybe Orange County. I think we had some offices, maybe another city, but I know those cities. And there's probably at this time 1,000 to 2,000 employees. All the way have to be paid, of course. He flies all the employees first class to Scottsdale, Arizona, puts us all up at company expense at one of the nicest resort hotels in Scottsdale.
I quit too early.
Yes. And at night, he would put us all in buses, all expenses paid, taking us to the hottest Scottsdale nightclubs where we would party. And then, of course, we'd all come back. And now it's a whole bunch of, and the other thing was, if you were a woman at StreetZebra, the prerequisite, you had to be 25 and very attractive. So you can now imagine this scenario of everybody drinking and now that returning to the.
No, I can't. Tell me more.
Well, I don't I didn't see anything because I went to my room. And I don't know what happened, but I do know it was a recipe for a lot of sexual harassment lawsuits. And I don't know if any of those actually happened. But the whole point of my story is you're spending enormous amounts of money on this junket to Scottsdale for what? What did we gain by it? We had some sort of symposium, talking about the business model, and Andy said a lot of nice things about me. I remember he said some very nice things about me, which I actually used on the back cover of a couple of my books.
Wow.
I can't remember. Steven Travers puts a lot of thought into every word that he writes, and I think he even said the word genius. So I actually lifted
with a glowing endorsement like that. How could you not have multiple book awards?
But so that was just one example. So you were gone by then. I remember going there and talking to Rick Devereaux, and his friend Chris Correa. It's like, we're having a good time, but sure spending an awful lot of money. As they say in baseball, leave it on the field, put the money on the field, or in movies, leave it on the screen, put the money into the screen, and put it into what you're really good at. And what we were good at was writing about and talking about sports in ways that people loved. And that was the original Simerson model, and we got away from that. Now,
let me say a quick word about Rick Devereaux. I would say that of all the people there who, in my time there, I left probably just a year before everything was shuttered, so I did make a good Irish exit just in time. And I remember at my exit interview, Andy was like, "Why are you leaving?" And I told him, I said, "This business it's not going to work. And he's like, "We're getting $10 million from Hicks Muse." I was like, "How long is that going to last?" So Rick Devereaux is the finest person from the StreetZebra era to me. And not only because of his genuine good nature and his likability, but because of the person he was then, and because of the person he is now. He wasn't a college graduate when he got to StreetZebra, but he became a college graduate. Not that that's a prerequisite for success. Trust me, I care less, or could not care less, which is the proper way to say that. I can't stand when people say I could care less. Yes, you could care less. People say I could not care less. So I could not care less about someone having multiple degrees or not. But he reinvented himself at some point of adulthood in Camas, Washington, with his wife, who I love to death, Amy, and their 2 children. And he went back and got his master's, and he became a teacher and coach in the Camas, Washington, Portland area, and is beloved by his students and his family. And I mean, this is not objective, but I think Rick Devereaux is my favorite person from that era because he's always been a genuine, honest, good person. And went to St. John Bosco, by the way.
Yeah.
We talk about that all the time because I went to Loyola, obviously. And but I love Rick Devereaux. I love his family, and I'm so proud of the person he is now and the person he was then. And how often can we say that? Because I'm not proud about the person I was then, certainly, monster. But Rick is just salt of the earth, good guy, and he's making the world a better place. So that's my plug for Rick Devereaux for Senate.
I agree with you 100%. I love Rick Devereaux, and I very much liked his good friend Chris Correa. And
great guy.
Speaking of going to school, he went to law after StreetZebra broke up. He went to law school, became an attorney.
He's a DA now or something, right?
I'm not sure. I know he's an attorney. he actually, in the course of knowing Chris and writing for StreetZebra and covering high schools, I became reacquainted with a guy named Chuck Fick, who his daughter,
Robert Fick's brother or dad?
Rob Fick's brother is Chuck Fick.
Okay.
Rob Fick, who played for the Tigers. And in fact,
Real quick, I got a great, what is Robert Fick's claim to fame in his baseball career?
being Chuck Fick's brother.
No. Robert Fick hit the last home run at the original Tiger Stadium.
Oh, okay. I
And
did
it
not
was a
know
grand
that.
slam.
I didn't know that.
Come on, baseball guy.
Yeah, no, I should have. I actually
Pulling too much weight in the show.
I went down with Chris and myself. I don't know if Rick came with us, and we went to the hotel where Rob Fick was rooming with Gabe Kapler. So I met Gabe Kapler. But Rob Fick's brother Chuck was a catcher in the minors with the A's when I played.
Wow.
And I later acquainted myself with Chuck and we became friends again. And I wrote about his daughter. And a quick aside, Chuck Fick was in 2 great movies. Chuck Fick was an actor. Chuck Fick was the catcher in Naked Gun when Leslie Nielsen pretends he's the umpire at Dodger Stadium at the end of the movie.
When Enrico Palazzo saved the Queen?
Yes, Chuck Fick is the catcher. And, it's right down the middle of the plate, and and the umpire's going, strike. That was Chuck Fick. Chuck Fick also was the first baseman in Mr. Baseball with Tom Selleck. And then that's what he was doing when he coached Rob and Chris in the Newbury Park American Legion team in 1992, and they won the national championship. And that got Chuck noticed by baseball again, and he got hired by the Cardinals as a scout. He's still with the Giants. But anyway, you were going to talk about Dot Bomb. This is how we kind of reacquainted, because you saw that article that I had written for some obscure website some years ago.
First of all,
let it rip, brother.
Initially, I was irate about what you'd written because, and I can remember this almost verbatim, you said I wasn't very handsome, which is clearly not true. You said I was fond of Irish whiskey and women, which at the time was certainly true. And you called me a rapscallion. And you said that we were discussing our favorite books of all time.
Yes.
And I said something by James Joyce or Byron's poetry or whatever I said, which has changed now since then. I have a new favorite book list, obviously. But, it evolves every year. I read too much. And you said the Bible. And your reaction in Dot Bomb was, and George cocked his head back and his eyes rolled back in his head and he reeled backwards and shook his head and walked away or something. I'm paraphrasing. But
go, my son.
I can imagine myself, good Catholic boy that I am. I'm in a monastery. Steve, I'm in a monastery in Italy right now. I've been in a monastery for 9 months. And I'm so fired up, I have to take my glasses off. Okay. You said that, and I can imagine early 30s me, early 30s, just reeling back and be like, I was expecting you to say something by Dostoevsky or Cervantes, and you said the Bible. I'm like, oh, this guy. But the other legendary Steven Travers line from your Dot Bomb serial was. And Rick Devereaux, aforementioned Rick Devereaux, who I love, to this day, we communicate pretty frequently. We will type these 2 words to each other all the time, and they are this. You wrote about his testicular cancer, and your sentence, and I'm paraphrasing, but I know the last 2 words for sure. Yeah. because it's prescient today. Like we are not prescient. It's omnipresent today that we use this. Rick Devereaux was just a young guy, happy to have a job. He got testicular cancer, but survived.
Yes.
You used but. But he survived. And Rick and I read that at his home in Washington in 2010 when I did my cross-country bike ride that's a whole other story. And I was at his house in Camas, Washington, in a kitchen. We printed up .bomb, and I'm like, read it to him, and we were crying, laughing, crying. And his daughter Reese had just been born, and now she's in high school, and we're crying because you wrote just a guy happy to have a job, got testicular cancer, but survived. And to this day, to your credit, this is what a legend you are.
Yeah.
We still text each other out of the blue, but survived.
What's that again?
We still text each other out of the blue, but survived.
But survived. I mean, is that all you write, or is that how you finish the text?
Sometimes that's all we write. That's all we need to write. Thank you. So
that's beautiful. Well, thank you. I'm happy to make the contribution.
But back to your .bomb series or serial, whatever, on that era at StreetZebra. Besides my not being handsome, which is clearly, I mean, I did quite well. I don't know if you know, I've quite a prolific.
Well, that was the point, is that you.
Okay, but
quite well with the
point was you were on point with everything they wrote. Your descriptions of the people and the stories were on point. So that I still think that .bomb should be a book. Now I don't know why you haven't turned into a book, but it should be.
I think you. Well, maybe you should.
And make sure your "but survived" is in there instead of.
So we could just call it "but survived."
That was I mean, Steven, I'm telling you, Rick and I will this week I'll get a text from him that's like, "but survived," because it's so. You're
going to have to send this video to him.
Yeah,
I'm going to send the link to you, and you can send it to Rick.
I'm going to send it, and I'm going to tell him the timestamp to find this section, so that he can know that it's.
I don't know if you're aware of this, and I only recently noticed this. If you have, you have to have a YouTube account. I don't know if you have a YouTube account, but if you have a YouTube account and you're when you're looking at this video, at the bottom it says AI Ask, and I never paid any attention to it, and I hit it about 2 weeks ago. It gives a complete summary of the entire video, and it'll talk about at hour. Oh God, we're hour 57, 1 hour 57 or whatever. It'll say the conversation shifted to the memories of Rick Devereaux and how George Cuddy and Rick have a running gag called "but survived" in a text thread. It'll actually it'll tell you where it is in the video. That's where AI is going these days.
I prefer to be pleasantly surprised, but I will send Rick this video, and he's going to be. It will receive some response, I'm sure. Great guy. I love him. I haven't seen him in person in 15 years, but I feel like if we saw each other tomorrow, it wouldn't matter. I love the guy. He's the best.
Oh, I loved Rick. I remember very early on. I think he gave me a ride somewhere, and we had a nice conversation. Just getting to know each other, because I didn't know anybody.
Put his hand on your leg, because he used to do that a lot.
He what?
Did he put his hand on your knee in the car? He used to do that all the time.
I don't remember that,
Okay.
but I remember he was into extreme sports. I remember we did a cover, and we gave Rick this cover story, which he normally didn't get, and it was the Tony Hawk, who was really just breaking in at the time, And Rick did a whole interview and story about Tony Hawk, and he was the cover.
I would argue that at the time it was the biggest thing in the world, not just breaking in at that point. It was 99, 2000. He was at the summit
of his sport. You're saying? Yeah. Okay.
I'm speaking for Rick Devereaux, who's the expert. And
no, I'm sure you're right. And I remember.
Let me correct you. I just want our audience.
No, you're absolutely right. And I remember Rick saying to me, I could interview Kobe Bryant, or I could interview, any number, Shaq O'Neal or whoever. And I would rather interview Tony Hawk. He's like the number one guy that I want to, this is like my dream interview. So, I mean, he loved that job and he was good at it. He was a good writer. And, in fact, I remember my daughter was really into all that extreme sports, skating and all that kind of thing. She would go down to the skate, and I remember she read that article, and she loved all the photos, of Tony Hawk doing airs and everything.
Yeah.
I got into that whole thing. I wrote a screenplay with some guys who were I wrote a screenplay about skateboarders. It was a knockoff on the Karate Kid, and instead of karate, it was snowboarding and skateboarding, and it was good. It never got made. It should have been made, but that's the life.
Would have been the follow-up to Ski School from '84.
That's true. Yeah. So one question I wanted to ask you: were you at UCLA when Herrick and the Bruins won the national title in hoops in '95?
95, I was not. No, I was out of there before then.
Okay.
But no, that was, that team was remarkable. I was not, in fact, I don't think Zach was out of there as well. So yeah, no one, I mean, I had a lot of friends at the school still, but it was not there in 95, 94.
That was a great era for Bruins sports. They beat the Trojans 7 or 8, I think 8 straight years in football.
Yeah.
Dominated in basketball. And, what do you think of UCLA now? What do you think of the whole move to the Big Ten, the possibility of playing
this is what I've been waiting for.
Okay.
This is what I've been waiting for. This is what I've had in my mind for the last week when you said you were going to have me on your esteemed program. Okay. And I don't have notes in front of me. This is all mental notes. So I'm going to walk you through this and try to explain what I would consider the irrationality of my emotional nature with this and my rational nature with this. So the combination of emotions and rationality are creating a current irrationality about UCLA football. As I stated earlier, I grew up skateboarding, ironically enough, as we just mentioned Tony Hawk, who was probably a little bit better than me, on UCLA's campus. I saw Bill Walton play at UCLA in Pauley Pavilion. I saw John Shara lead UCLA to the upset in the '76 Rose Bowl against Ohio State. I was a diehard fan. I was at the first game at the Rose Bowl against Long Beach State when the Rose Bowl became their home after the Coliseum. I got lucky enough to go to UCLA. I am a UCLA sports historian. Now, the problem that you and I face, and people in our generation face, whether they are USC lifelong fans and attendees, or people like myself, or people who went to Stanford or Cal or Washington or Oregon, is this. We have an idyllic, now misplaced viewpoint on a golden era of sports that was important to us because going to the Rose Bowl was all that mattered. And we knew that SC or Washington or UCLA or whoever was going to play Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan State, or whoever. And we knew that there was no playoff. And we knew that there was really something interesting about Washington and Miami in 91 being both undefeated and not playing, or Alabama and USC splitting the national championship in 78 because the writers and the coaches, AP and UPI, were different. There was a built-in curiosity and passion that developed because of an uncertainty of a definitive national champion in football. I will make the argument based generationally that it was better when there wasn't a playoff. It was better when the SEC champion went to the Sugar Bowl. It was better when the Big Ten champion went to the Rose Bowl and the Pac-10 champion went to the Rose Bowl. We've talked about this before this show. We have talked about the failure of the Pac-10 to admit the correct two schools, okay? The problem started with Colorado and Utah. Why do you say that, George? Well, Colorado State would have been fine. BYU, San Diego State would have been beautiful. Utah State would have been fine. A natural rivalry, historical rivalry, paired into the 5 existing regional rivalries that all played their last game of the season against that rival in the Apple Cup or Bowl, whatever it is, in the big game, splitting back and forth between the Coliseum and in odd years, and the Rose Bowl in even years. And San Diego State, BYU would have been fantastic. Instead, they chose Colorado and Utah. Step 1. Step 2, and we've talked about this before, was the failure in the center of television entertainment in the world. The failure to beat the SEC and the Big Ten to create a network. Okay, so years went by when the SEC and the former Southwestern Conference, and the Big Ten were generating millions of dollars in revenue and building the brand, while the Pac-12, which I hate calling it the Pac-12, by the way, failed to generate $1 on a network, got to the game late. What happened concurrently? Well, in 1998, UCLA is number 1 in the nation. They're playing a delayed game because of a hurricane against the Hurricanes in Miami, and they go down there in a shootout, and Edgar and James runs for 300 yards, and they lose. And then 3.5 weeks later, 4 weeks later, they go to the Rose Bowl against Wisconsin, and they hold Ron Dayne to 4 touchdowns. Okay, so that was the end of UCLA football. Mm-hmm. They gave up on Toledo a year. Don't forget, in 97, 98, they beat Texas twice. Okay, they beat Texas 66-3 in 97.
Living in LA and went to some games.
Route 66. They beat Texas next year, I think 41-28 or 41-24, whatever. They beat Ricky Williams both those years. Okay, so
you're 60 on Ricky Williams.
66. Route 66 on September 13th, 1997 at Darrell Road Stadium. Thank you very much. So that was the high point. That was it. The loss to Miami and the loss to Wisconsin, that was the end of UCLA football. Yes, they upset SC 14-8 at one point in the 2000s. They also lost 50-0. They lost 59-0 to BYU. Yes, they had that comeback game against A&M. Yes, they had the Neuheisel comeback against Texas. Steve, I'm telling you about 2 big wins in 26 years. I'm talking about the comeback against Texas and the comeback against A&M. No one brings up 59-0 loss to BYU. No one brings up 50-0 loss to USC. UCLA football with tarps over seats in the Rose Bowl, okay, which is embarrassing. You better bring those tarps to SoFi. That's a whole other story, because you're going to have to cover up sections there as well. Oh, I don't know what this means. I'm just getting some fancy thing popped up. Okay, so failure to start the network early, failure of UCLA football. You have now on the Big Ten network, which has absorbed the four schools from the Pac-10, Pac-12, you have the Big Ten network showing highlights of Anthony Davis against Notre Dame, as if USC has always been in the conference. Yeah. Now, for you and me, men in their 50s and 60s. That's disgusting. But if I'm a 21-year-old at Michigan watching that, I'm like, yeah, SC beat Notre Dame back in the day. I watched the fuzzy highlights of it, Anthony Davis on his knees in the end zone. They're showing highlights of Bill Walton era at UCLA and Lou Alcindor era at UCLA on the Big Ten Network, okay? This is a problem. You have the three.
They're absorbing all our national championships into their history.
Yes. And the three schools with the most national team championships in history in NCAA: Stanford, USC, and UCLA. Well, Stanford and Cal are in the ACC now, and USC and UCLA in the Big Ten. And by the way, those three schools, including Cal, of course, who's also in the ACC now, they've produced more national championships than most conferences have combined.
Cal, something like 4 national championships.
They've produced more Olympic medalists and certainly more gold. Stanford, USC, and UCLA have produced more gold medalists than the majority of countries in the Olympics.
That's right.
In the history of the Olympics.
That's right.
Okay, so, I'm losing my mind. They should have never fired Bob Toledo. They should have figured something out with the Coliseum or SoFi earlier. They're now sharing a stadium with 2 pro teams. You know the LA market. There's going to be 6 home games at SoFi for the Bruins. Okay? The following day, the odds are there's going to be a Chargers game or a Rams game. All right? You know the LA market. If you're not a kid at UCLA, who's going to go to those games on Saturday? I don't care if it seats 60,000 or 95,000 plus at the Rose Bowl. They're not drawing, and they're not going to draw. And this kid, this coach Chesney from James Madison, he's a good coach. He's a young guy. He's energetic. He's never sat in anyone's living room in South Central LA. He's never gone out to Diamond Bar where the athletes are and tried to recruit. Okay, there is going to be even more of an exodus to the SEC and the Big Ten than there ever has been before from Southern California. SC will be fine. UCLA football is done.
I'm going to pop in real quick here. I don't know if you're aware of this. It's in today's LA Times. Believe it or not, Lincoln Riley and USC have the #1 recruiting class in the United States. And they did it by returning to recruiting in LA, which Riley didn't do.
Okay.
Anyway,
Steve, LSU's defense this year cost $18 million, Louisiana State University, okay? As you know, I have close connections, haven't lived there and friends with them. They spent $18 million on their defensive players. They lost 4 games. Okay? They went 8-4 with an $18 million payroll and NIL for their defense. Now, clearly, Lane's going to have something to do with that, whatever. But you think UCLA is going to spend $18 million in NIL money or on a defense or offense? UCLA is going to be the Purdue and formerly Northwestern, okay, when they used to be terrible, of the Big Ten. It's over. And I don't blame this coach for taking the job. I'm sure he's a nice guy. I'm sure he's a capable coach. He's not going to have the backing. Oh, don't get me started on the athletic director, Jarmon. Don't. I can't even start. I'm just giving you facts, okay? Those 2 losses in December of '98.
Yeah.
The firing of Toledo.
You couldn't be more right.
It's been a downhill slide, and now it's coming in this era of. I'll finish with this. I'm sorry. I used to track players from high school through college. When a kid from Loyola High School went to UCLA or SC, I'd follow him, and I would know that Joe Schmo's, Billy Washington, whoever, number was 26 or number 7 or 41 or 11. And I'd be like, oh, that kid went to my high school. That's Anthony Barr. He went to Loyola, and now he's playing for the Vikings. He's perfect. He went to the Loyola and UCLA, and now the Vikings. Cool. You know what my new mantra is? And I credit my friend Kevin Smith, who's another sports guy like us, lives in Baton Rouge, LSU guy, brilliant guy with sports. You know what our new rule is? We're not going to know any player names in colleges. Whoever's number 26 for UCLA, I'm going to say go number 26, because why get to know the kid if you can skip town before the bowl games and jump to another school? Why do I support Dante Moore, the #1 recruit in the country at quarterback 2 years ago, if he's going to stay for a year and go to Oregon? I'll root for number 7. I'll root for number 10. I'll root for number 8. I'm not going to know the names. I don't care. I can't do it. I can't. And here's one more thing. Finally, sorry, I've talked for 10 minutes. I apologize. One last thing. Do you think that the NCAA and the sponsors and television cares about us anymore? They got hundreds of thousands of 18-year-olds showing up every August to all the top schools in the country, hundreds of thousands of new college students. That's the market. The market is on their device and their pad, and it's not us. So we have aged out. I hate to tell you this, as hip as we think we are, I'm not, but we've aged out. We're not in the market. We're not in the demographic. The demographic is every 18-year-old showing up on a campus and thinking UCLA and USC have always been in the Big Ten. For us, it's emotional. For them, it's matter of fact. And that's the reality.
Yeah. And who knows, who has any idea that once upon a time, the Texas-Arkansas game was one of the greatest rivalries in sports. I'm sorry. And
what are your thoughts? Sorry to talk so much.
Well, right off the bat, and we're going to have to wrap up in a second, but right off the bat, I say this has happened in basketball a long time ago. I don't know anybody who plays basketball. I don't know the names of anybody. And I grew up just like you, watching Bill Walton and Kareem Jabbar and David Myers and even Paul Westphal very closely because they were playing for my team. That was basketball. You mentioned the television deal. I have a good friend. I've talked to you about him. He was on our show about 4 months ago. His name is Terry Marks. Terry was not able to, on this show, get into every detail about what he would have done if he'd become commissioner of the Pac-12. He was almost commissioner of the Pac-12 in 2012. They didn't give it to him. He said he can't say everything he knows because he's got non-disclosure agreements. I can say this: had he been head of that, I would have been in charge of the television setup for the Pac-12 network. Mainly what I would have been in charge of doing would be creating documentaries about the history of the Pac-12, just like SEC Story. And we don't have anything like that. We never did, and Terry didn't get the job. So those are examples of what could have happened, what might have happened, and what didn't happen. I will say this. We might not be of the demographic that ESPN is looking for, but there is a demographic for us, and we're on it. And it's called Take 5 with Steven Travers, and it's called 100 Yards of Football. We had Reggie Jackson on yesterday. We're trying to build a brand here, and the brand here is that people like you and me, people our age, who are 50 years and older, we do remember all these fabulous things, and we do talk about them here. And so that's what we're trying to do, because we're not going to try to compete with, whatever bells and whistles the Southeastern Conference or the Big Ten has. We are going to talk about these things that shaped our lives, away from the numbers. The life of George Cuddy, the life of Travers, playing baseball, growing up, loving US. I mean, I don't even know if kids look at a school like USC and UCLA the way we did. We idolized those schools as shrines and desperately wanted to get in, and we somehow got in. I somehow got in, and you somehow became a Bruin. I don't know if these kids look at it like they did. I don't know. I think conversations with young people. I spoke to a young man at the College World Series a couple of years ago, and he was a smart kid, but just his view on life and women and relationships and everything was so skewered and odd and weird. It's like, glad I'm not that age anymore.
Well, I will say this, and not that I have been football and basketball centric necessarily in my entire UCLA existence from childhood, but I have really developed an appreciation for the other sports at the school, that I was aware of their successes in the past. And this is not because of the football team's lack of success by any means. It's more the environment of college football as a whole and the progression towards this. I don't believe sustainable NIL model, but we'll see. This quick progression that's happening at light speed with football. I find myself enjoying following swimming and diving and softball and field. And I find myself following those accounts on social media and not following football and basketball because of the turnover in athlete. If a kid signs to come to do cross country at UCLA, they're going to be there 4 years. Okay. If they play softball, they're going to be at UCLA for 3 or 4 years. There is not going to be this itinerant traffic, constant itinerant traffic of like Dante Moore last year, for example. And that's despicable. It's disgusting. And I'm just going to follow number 11 or number 12 or number 4 or number 88. I'm not going to get to know the names of the football players because I don't have the bandwidth to keep up with the movement.
No, and I don't.
So that's just my.
I'm with you, George. You and I agree on so many things. I'm going to close out with this. One, I went to the College World Series in 2023. I've been to everything, my friend. I've been to the Super Bowl, been to the many World Series, All-Star games in different sports, seen it all. The greatest sporting event I've ever attended in my life. And I'm predicting this. I'm predicting that college baseball, at least in the South, and probably growing to a larger place, will be a more popular entity than college basketball within 10 to 20 years. So, George Cuddy, I want to thank you so very much for being guest on Take 5 with Steven Travers. Unfortunately, Harper, his business meeting must have just gone on because he was supposed to join us. And I know you would have liked to have spoken to him and asked if he had played against the West Valley Cowboys.
Woodland Hills Cowboys.
Woodland Hills Cowboys. The Woodland. Sorry about that. Got that one wrong. I could see the look.
Well, there were the West.
Not Travers.
The West Valley Eagles were a team. They were based at El Camino High School, and the Woodland Hills Cowboys were based at Taft High School. So
okay, all right. Well, he went to Notre Dame. That was obviously a private Catholic school, but it's been really great catching up with you. We do have our occasional chats on WhatsApp. We're going to have to sort of pick that back up as we get into the 2026. And your insights on all these things are really borderline genius, my friend. You have a real,
maybe a little above borderline, maybe just
you have a real knack for just seeing things the way they are and getting to the nub of it. So, George Cuddy, thank you so much, my friend, for being our guest. I'm going to send you a link. Send it to Rick Devereaux and send it to everybody else that you want to send to.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And this has been a surprisingly wonderful experience. I was expecting to get skewered a little bit, but to be called borderline genius has exceeded my own lack of humility. So thank you.
You're killing me, Smalls. All right. Thank you. All right, Logan, thanks for hanging in with us. This has been Take 5 with Steven Travers, and we'll see you next week. Our guest will be Barry Kemp, who was the producer of the television show Coach, as well as many movies, including Patch Adams, among many others. So, see you later.